report. Yet comes upon one of the strangest things in existence.
Neil Armstrong may have seen extraterrestrials on the moon.
When he spies a discernible shape.
That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
You can deny all the things I've seen, all the things I've discovered, but not for much longer. Because too many others know what's happening out there. And no one, no government agency has jurisdiction over the truth.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. Yet again, we are here on another Thursday night. This is for Full Spectrum Universal YouTube channel and Appalachian Memes and shared everywhere. Please share this stream out to anybody and everybody who may enjoy it. A few things we're going to discuss tonight. First off, our main topic is a 1973 abduction story from around the Tennessee area. It is going to be a wild ride. I have basically an interview that was held by the police officers when these men went to the police and tried to describe this instance of what happened. And I have that recording. So really cool, really cool. Also, for those of you who did not hear about the breaking news, they have just discovered fossil footprints that show humans in North America more than 21,000 years ago. The footprints are the earliest firm evidence for humans in the Americas and shows that people must have arrived here before the Ice Age, which totally deconstructs the ice bridge theory like we talked about the last time, and what me and a lot of the people that I work with have been saying, that this 12,500 year little archetype that they put together is not, it's not correct, just not correct. So that was just something I really had to bring up, and we could go on that subject for forever. But first off, one of the things I want to describe to you is how we go about cataloging specific encounters. Now, if somebody has an encounter by themselves, we take it as basically somebody who is been abducted or has seen something. We catalog that event. Now, when there are two people involved, the credibility of that event exponentially goes up. Now, why that is because two people that are separated telling the same story, of course, is how, if you're a police investigator, you know that that's how you get corroborating stories. And when corroborating stories come to fruition, it's essentially a bigger deal. It's a little bit more credible when you hear it from two different people. While there may be slight differences, it's not always different. So first thing I want to show, and I also have an interrogation document from the police officers of these two gentlemen, and it's Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker. We're going to get into their story, but first I'm going to show you who they are. This happened in 1973, and one of the reasons why I love going back and looking at some of these specific encounters is because right now everybody is looking for disclosure, right? And everybody wants this disclosure. This disclosure is going to happen. It's going to be great, you know, but what are we looking for? A lot of people have had these same instances for a very long time, And these two gentlemen have one of the biggest cases that has ever broken in the United States. Not only that, this actual abduction led off to an entire season of people that said that they have seen within the same area the same type of encounter, right? Or have witnessed it. Now, one of the great things about this story is not only are there these two gentlemen who are corroborating the story, there is somebody who came out, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, 45 years later, describing the instance at which these two were actually abducted and what she saw from a further off vantage point. So this story gets wild. It gets wild, and it's a lot of fun. I also have 2 videos to show you while we're sitting here too. One of which is like I said, the police video of the interrogation. also is an interview done in 1975 by a local news organization. And it shows you that, one of the other things that people, when they investigate, is they ask you to say the story 3 or 4 times. Why is that? Because they want to see if at any time in that story you change what you're saying. Therefore, again, it'll lose credibility. It means that you're probably making it up, and not as many people, are a lot of people do that when they make things up. So let's get into what this actually means, right? So in the fall of 1973, it's one of the largest waves of UFO sightings in history. Hundreds of reports poured into news outlets across the country, with the greatest concentration in the Southeast and Tennessee. And it was no exception that the newspapers and accounts have chronicled unknown objects in the sky, and there is even a few reports of high strangeness on the ground. And in September, October became the autumn of aliens, is what they called it. As adults shook their heads in disbelief, the kids gobbled up the news with a mixture of excitement and wonder. Now, another thing that we're going to talk about is what this did for the UFO community. We're going to get to that part a little bit later, but from this point, you have to understand the time that we're talking about. And this is why I want to set the stage. 1973. UFOs are not mainstream, not like it is today. So these gentlemen coming out and reporting this would have such a great effect on their social lives, their financial lives, that it's very difficult to see specific people going out of their way to make these stories up with no benefit to them. No benefit. So we have to take it as it stands, right? So when we're looking at this in an investigative way, we're looking at it. What is their motive, right? What's their motive for saying these things? And from what I understand, these gentlemen actually believe that this happened to them, and it's an exciting story. It truly is. So, it's been in newspapers. I have a newspaper article from that time as well, which we're going to show up. It's a small clip. It was scanned onto a computer. I did a little bit of a deep dive into this one, and this is the type of craft they thought they saw, and the type of alien that they encountered are extraterrestrial. And it had like a lobster style claws, but it also, and people see that and they're like, oh, that can't be right. Can't be right. When you look at it, it's definitely, when they get into their explanation of what they saw and how they saw it, it gets to be crazy. It gets a little wild, and it's a lot of fun. So we're going to keep going. In Nashville, the encounters began on September 3rd, 1973. The Tennessean reported a sighting by the South Nashville homemaker and her 3 children, who described a distant light that changed colors, then a red triangular object with 3 white lights moving rapidly across the sky. Metro Police investigated but proclaimed the lights to be out of their jurisdiction. Now, this is just another instance of somebody else seeing specific sightings within this area. This area was a hotspot, and I have a theory on why that might be. And if we talk about ley lines are a grid that runs across the globe. And when people can tap into energies and frequencies, they can feel an emanating presence from the earth itself. Some people call it Mother Gaia, but these ley lines are flows of conductive power and frequency that go across the planet. And when that happens, people tend to get more of like a mediumship or a psychic ability. We see more Bigfoot sightings. We see more high strangeness in the air. And Tennessee is a place where 2 of these ley lines supposedly intersect. I'm not going to say whether it's fact or fiction. It has not been corroborated, but from what I understand, it's there. And this is where they're talking about essentially is like an X or a cross of these ley lines, which shows you're not only getting it from one point, right? It's not just one ley line going across, it's 2. And that's what makes Tennessee one of the biggest paranormal and UFO style areas in the country. In all of the United States, Tennessee is a hot spot. It's what's called a hot spot. So going into what we're talking about, these people saw encounters for fall season. It wasn't just a one-off and then done, right? So, now we're going to talk about some of the people around, and then we're going to get into these gentlemen's story. And I'm not going to go too far into it because I want you to hear the tape recording first, and then we're going to talk about their story a little bit. But, the MNPD's declaration report in Nashville didn't attract much attention for the next few weeks, but West Tennessee law enforcement apparently didn't get the memo on September 25th. The Tennessean reported that Shelby County deputies in Memphis spotted a whirling, hovering craft. Now, this is deputies, okay? Now, this is law enforcement, all right? So keep that in mind. A whirling, hovering craft sweeping with 2 white spotlights. And later in the week, similar objects were reported by sheriffs in Lauderdale and Obion counties. Judging by news reports, the UFOs seem to be edging closer to the middle of Tennessee, making their first landfall in Giles County on October 1st. The Pulaski Citizen reported that the 3 teenage boys witnessed a landing of an egg-shaped craft near Anthony Hill Community, and a large, hairy, stiffly walking occupant. Sounds like Bigfoot, right? And of course, it's kids, so we take this one as a little bit of a grain of salt, but they did have a rendition of what they saw, and this is actually the same style picture that Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker also saw. It's the same exact thing. North Carolina as a hotspot also. Yes, Kevin, it definitely is. The Appalachia region is known for multiple hotspots. And it's not just, it has a lot more to do than just the mountains. It's also the culture of the place, the heritage, and the interaction with these phenomena, which makes the Appalachian region one of the greatest places to investigate if you're into this stuff, because not only did people, encounter so much, the way that they describe it and the way that when you approach them about it, it becomes phenomenal. So let's keep going. So reports continued to trickle in from Tennessee and around the country throughout the first week of October, then began to flow like a gusher of swamp gas after one of the famous abduction cases in UFO history broke on Thursday, October 11th, right? This is where we get to it. That evening, 2 dockyard workers in Pascagoula, I hope I'm saying that right, Pascagoula, Mississippi, said that they saw a light approaching them as they were fishing on the banks of the Pascagoula River, which is a place where people always go and fish. So it's not off the norm that these guys would be down there, right? Because a lot of people talk about this area for great fishing. So within minutes, Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker were confronted by a wrinkly-skinned, eyeless gray creature with long arms ending in claws. Hickson and Parker were paralyzed and floated into the hovering craft for a short examination before being dumped back on the shore, right? The story took national media by storm. And while no one could explain what had really happened to the pair, those who met them almost agreed they had experienced something truly terrifying. Now, we're going to get further into this. So, when these gentlemen came back and decided to speak about what they wanted to speak about and tell people about this encounter, first thing they did was they went to the police because they could not explain what had happened. And with that breeds a whole new thing, right? A whole new chapter to this specific story. And at first, when you see, I saw interviews of these gentlemen talking about this again, and we're going to get to that later in 1975. And when you look at how this gentleman is acting while telling this story, you can tell that something truly terrifying, just like that quote says, has happened. And, Kevin brings up a great point here, and I'm going to go to it because they've been trying to figure out what the Brown Mountain Lights are for over 100 years, and we talked about the Brown Mountain Lights in episode 1 when we were talking about all the strange occurrences that happened in Appalachia and all the different creatures and different types of high strangeness. And when we say high strangeness, that's Bigfoot, that's Mothman, that's UFO, that's everything. High strangeness means something that is an anomaly that people cannot explain. And since I've opened up this can of worms in this region, it has truly, truly been fascinating because there is so many different style accounts of different beings and or creatures that people have come in contact with, and it becomes this it's like this mystique for the area. It's almost to the point where I feel like I have to go into these mountains now, bring any phone target than they like to let us believe we are, you know? And there is something to this, right? Like a lot of people in those areas now, they don't really talk about it that much. You know, and here's what we have a comment right here. We never really talk about it anymore because, and this is not getting political, but the polarity of the conversation is what side you're on, who you're siding with, and we're not getting back to these areas where we're looking at what's actually happening anymore. We're so caught up in what mainstream media has to say that it's really dampening the conversation, right? That's why we do shows like this, to put out information that isn't widely talked about, right? It might be up for speculation, but at least let's explore it. You know, let's get in it together and let's really root out what we can say is we think to be fact or we think to be fiction. And ultimately, what we're trying to do is we're trying to press on and bring information to people that they want to hear, not the same things every day, getting hammered by mainstream media. And while we're talking about that, I'm slowly it's taken me a long time and it's going to take me a long time, but I am actually making a website that is going to be a pushback against the mainstream media's narrative. It's going to be whole news for what it is, a centrist style news. Here's the facts, you decide, that kind of thing. But so let's get to this, right? So now we're going to show a video. This video is, I think it's about 3 minutes long, and it's going to be a little bit difficult to hear. So I want you to definitely pay attention. It's going to have subtitles so you can read along with what you're hearing. Now, I want you to take into consideration the way that these men sound, what they're talking about, and how frightening it is to hear their voices this way. So, with that being said, we're going to add to the stream, and as you can see, we're going to full screen it. Let's see. Let's play this, and you tell me what you think.
I know you home with the bear to get some nerve pills or something, some doctor or something. I can't stand it. I'm about to go all crazy. I'll take you by the, when they get through this, we'll go by the burn. I'll get you something, settle you down with so you get some damn sleep. I can sleep without like it is. I understand you're crazy. But yeah, when he brought you out of that damn thing, and when he brought me out, well, I like to know what the hell you know. God damn, I like to know what the hell got you straightened out, man. I didn't know it. I remember my heart. They just froze out just like that. I couldn't move it. Just like I stepped on a damn rose. No, they didn't do me that way, though. Oh, Lord have mercy. I passed out. I passed out. That's the first time I ever passed out in my life. You should have needed medical records. You can't make people believe that, though. I don't know, sit here and believe it out, because I know better wake up and start believing. Damn right. I wake up and start believing. Damn right. Listen, I mean, I seen it. I can't figure out the damn. You see how that door will come in on that side of the shop? Yeah, I don't know how to open something. I don't know. I didn't see no door swing. I don't know how to open. I don't know how to see it open. All right, just see something like. And look around, them damn blue lights and them some just like that to come out. Yeah, no, you can't believe it. You can't make people believe it. I paralyzed right there. I couldn't believe it. They won't believe it one of these days. They won't believe it one of these days. Might be too late. I knew all along there was people from outer worlds up there. I knew all along. I never thought it would happen to me. You know yourself, I don't drink. I know, man. So I get the house, I'm going to get them another drink to make me sleep. Yeah, I can't. There's something wrong with you. What are we waiting on? I got to go tell Blaine something. How did it say we had to wait on? I got no house. I don't sit here. You can go and see. I'm getting sick. I ain't see. I got to go to the house. Wait a minute. Let me go.
Just like that. That you could hear, you know, how crazy that sounded. It sounded like they were so nervous, right? That it's bizarre. And you know, the incident involving these two fishermen is one of the biggest known cases or investigations in the UFO history in the United States. And one of the things that gets me is when he says, I didn't even believe it. I didn't even believe it. And you think to yourself, he's saying to people, you know, they better start believing it because it happened. And I honestly think that these men had an incident that happened to them. And you could hear in their voice, like, I don't even know what to say. Like they were just like not complacent, but they were just like kind of put off. Like it's I don't know what to tell you. It is what it is. You could either believe it or not. But, and you know, one of the things that people say that they try to discredit them with is they've never heard of anybody else having an encounter with a lobster-like creature with claws. But if you know, I'm not saying whether it's here nor there, but just because evolution didn't take that path on this planet doesn't mean it can't take it somewhere else, right? We've got to be open-minded to the different entities that possibly visit this planet. So it also has similarities to a lot of other stories. The paralyzation, the people didn't, you know, people always talk about being in their bed paralyzed, but one of the things that differs is them floating towards another craft and then being basically examined in this other craft, which is also something that people say a lot too. But the floating part, right? When they found these two gentlemen, when they got up, they were both laying down right from where. Well, I'm sorry. One of them was laying down right where they were, and the other one was, I believe, yards away from where he had been picked up, which is wild. So, you know, this is one of the stories in the autumn of aliens, right? And I don't really like the word alien. I like extraterrestrial because it gives more of a credence to either a terrestrial creature, which is from this planet, regardless of what it is, or extraterrestrial, you know? And when I heard this conversation, I was like, what in the hell is happening here? It took me aback a little bit. And I was like, these gentlemen, you could hear in their voice, even though it's a little cracking, and you know, you could still hear the tone in their voice. And I'm accentuating that because if you have to, go back and listen to it again. It's incredible. Now, with this specific story, there is somebody else who, as of late, came out and said, I saw something. And we're going to get into that too, which is, this is from the Pascagoula local news station, right, in Biloxi, Mississippi. So this is from WLOX, and it states a UFO and an alien abduction on the Pascagoula River you may have heard of from the 70s. Now, 45 years later, for the first time, a witness is coming forward saying she saw this alien encounter. On October 11th, 1973, Calvin Parker and now deceased Charles Hickson said while fishing they were pulled onto a spacecraft, examined, and put back down. Quote, and this is I quote, "It scared the living hell out of you," Parker said. "I still have a few nightmares about it. I really think that I was abducted by some kind of life from another planet." And that was just one of the statements that he made. So Parker and Hickson's story made the world, and we know it went all around. And they say, oh, that's where the UFO encounter was. And they point out to people, and there's a picture of it, and I'm going to show you the picture of exactly where this encounter happened. We're going to share screen real quick, just so you can see it as well. It's a really wild. It's a really nice picture. It looks like a really nice place. I mean, that looks like a great place, but this is where they were abducted from. So pretty wild. So, now we get to this person. And on the same October 1973 night, not far from where the marker will be, they're putting a marker down to commemorate this abduction. They're getting a marker if it's not there already. I think this article is a little bit older, but that's how impactful this abduction was, that they're going to leave a marker by the water. So on the same night, not far from where the marker will be placed on the east bank of the river, Maria Blair was waiting with her husband, Jerry Blair. She was waiting for her husband, Jerry Blair, for him to leave on a boat to go to work off the shore. What she saw that night is something she's telling for the first time publicly. And now this is corroborating stories. Now this is 3 people who are seeing the same thing, right? So she says, it's a warm night. It's like 73 degrees. And it was kind of easy to just sit in the car and wait for the captain to get there, Blair said. While they were waiting for Jerry, Maria basically fell asleep for a little while. And then what happens is she woke up and Maria saw a strange blue light streaking back and forth across the water. You're looking up at the sky, looking at the stars, the Big Dipper and things. That's when I saw it rise up from the sky, Blair said. Where I saw it come up, the blue light was just right over where they were abducted. And at that time, she thought it was a plane or a helicopter. And basically, she says, you don't think it was a UFO, but with corroborating story, so she also says, we hear this loud water. Just something fell in the water. It was a loud splash, Blair said. The water was just rippling, and when I looked down, that's when it looked like a person in the water. I was looking just right below me. So now we get more to the story, right? So people believe that when they're abducted, they go up. Sometimes that doesn't happen. They go down. They hide in the water, right? And hiding in the water is something that you're seeing, and more and more and more. There's so many Navy captains and people who work on Navy ships all over the world. They're called USOs, unidentified submerged objects. So now we're looking at a different perspective of how this abduction took place. And it's also a corroborating story of the same time on the same night. So that's 3 separate people. Now, like I told you before, when 2 people see it, the credibility exponentially goes up. Now that 3 people saw it, exponentially tremendous. It begs to believe that something strange happened that night, right? I mean, to me, I think that that's exactly what happened. But I'm just me, right? I'm not everybody, but I like to think about these things. So she goes on. She says Blair still doesn't know what she saw in the water and didn't think much of it until the next day when she heard about Parker and Hickson and had told Jackson County Sheriff's Department. So she said, I was watching the two men being abducted by a UFO. Despite believing what she saw was a UFO, she never talked about it to anybody except her family. Blair's husband wanted her to keep it quiet. That's exactly what we were talking about. This sentiment, right? You will be labeled as a lunatic or a crazy person. It could have such detriment to your social life, to your financial life, to your working environment, everything. This is not a time as open as it is now. So people didn't just come forward, right? And it begs to ask the question, how many people saw this same instance or other instances and have yet to come forward because of the time in which that happened? It could be, like I said, it could be astronomical, the number of people who saw this stuff. So despite believing what she saw, she never talked about it, right? And when she would talk about it, I would tell her to shut up. People are going to think you're crazy, said Jerry Blair. And after seeing recent media reports about the abduction, Blair got the courage to come forward. And she said her motivation was to give Calvin Parker and Charles Hickson's story validation. So they actually met, and Hickson said, I always wanted to talk to them, just them about it, to let them know. That's basically what she was saying to them. I wanted to let them know because they weren't lying. They weren't lying, is what she said. So in 1973, Maria Blair and Calvin Parker were separated by a river. Now, with a 45-year-old secret washed under the bridge, Blair met Parker face to face for the first time at the same spot at the Pascagoula River where the alleged abduction had happened. It didn't take long for the conversation to turn to what's brought them together. This is them conversing now. So, it's burnt right in my mind, Blair said. Parker agreed. Mine too. Parker's story has been questioned and doubted for most of his life, and he said he had lost all hope of witnesses coming forward. But now he and Blair both have a sense of relief. I can now put my mind at ease that I told what I knew, Blair said. So Calvin Parker also wrote a book called My Story. And it goes on and on. He says, before I die, at least I have somebody that came forward to ease my mind a little bit. So this shows you how much backlash this actually caused for these men. And like I said, the times are indicative of why they would be fearful of coming out with this story. So now I want to play for you a clip from a 1975 interview. Okay. And this is about these men who claim he was, or a man who was claimed he was abducted by aliens. This is one of the gentlemen. I believe this is Parker again. But this is a big, long newscast. So I'm going to try and get you to where it needs to be, which is already queued up, but we're going to stop it abruptly. But it's on YouTube if you want to see it. So just to let you know. So I'm going to share the screen again. And, this story is so fascinating to me. It's so fascinating. Now, it's already up to a minute. It's a 10-minute video, so I may not play the whole thing, but let's get into it.
We were sitting on the other side of the pier with our feet, over toward the river, fishing in the river.
That was actually Hickson. I apologize.
And the fish still wasn't biting, so I told Calvin, I said, well, we might as well go home. But I guess that was when I heard it. It was some kind of zipping sound. And when I turned around, in this area out here, about 40 or 50 feet out there, there was some kind of crab, it looked like it's going to come out onto the ground. But it came on down and hovered about a foot and a half or 2 feet off of the ground. We didn't know what to do, the river behind us, and and that out there, not knowing what it was. So, and then before we had time to really do anything, it seemed like an opening appeared. Toward the end, it was, toward us. And the blue light, it had blue flashing lights as it was, approaching the ground, but then they went out. And when the opening appeared, some source of light came from the inside. It was just almost blinding.
Sheriff Diamond, can you tell me just what happened that night?
No, sir, I can't. All I can tell you is there was two men came into the sheriff's department approximately 8:30 and 9 o'clock. They were all excited and upset, wanting to climb the walls, hysterical, crying. That's actually all I know is what happened. And as far as me seeing what happened, I don't know.
Of course, we could see them in the opening coming from, when it started out to craft. But
Did you think it was people coming out at first?
Well, they had. I kind of thought it was people at first, off like that. But of course, when they appeared there in front of me, it was the most shock I've ever had in my life.
What did you see?
Well, they were shorter than me. I'd say about 5'2" or 3", and they didn't have a neck. They had, it seemed to come directly to their shoulders, and they had something. It came out to a point about where a nose would be, and on each side the ears. And I believe that they looked like they were a little longer on the ears than the nose.
But still pointed the ears.
They were still pointing, yes.
But since I was down there, since I was a physician and several other scientists and investigators were asked to consult and look into the situation, I was asked would I mind if I would be present, and I said I wouldn't mind at all. And while it is still very difficult for us to believe that a spaceship landed and that robot type creatures came out and actually took these two people into the spaceship, these men, in my opinion, believe that they saw this and that they were being honest in reporting what they have reported.
But it seemed to me when they came out that doorway, or that opening, or whatever it was, then just almost instantly they were right there on us. And their arms, they had arms. And I saw the arms moving here and in the shoulders, but they had weld. I mean, their fingers were weld, and then they had something like a thumb, and they were like this.
We questioned them at length. And then we left the room and recorded every all the conversation they had. Recorded between the two of them. And one of them kept wanting to pray. And he said, after all I went through on this earth, he said, why should I have to see something like this?
Calvin Parker, I was questioning him, and at one time he wanted to climb the wall. That's how nervous and how shook up he was.
They had me one on this arm like this, and on the other one, they had my other arm like that. And I just seemed to lift up to the same height they were off the ground, and we just moved into the crowd.
Now inside, how did they lay you out? Do you remember how it happened?
Yes. I didn't see any tables or chairs or anything in there. I'm not saying it wasn't in there because the light was almost blinding, but I didn't see any. And when they carried me inside, they seemed to just lean me back, and this eye, I keep referring to it as an eye, and it moved up in front of me about this close, and it started right at my eyes, looking me right in the eye. And it hesitated there for a few seconds, and it just started moving over my entire body. When they brought me from the craft along this area here, and they didn't drop me, they just released me back to the ground. And I fell. I don't know why my legs were weak. I don't know why it was the fright or what it was, but I fell onto the ground. And that's when I seen Calvin. He's standing right over here in this area, and he was standing facing the river with his arms outstretched like that, just like he was staring at something.
And tell me about the lie detector test.
Well, so that was run by Pilkington. Was it Pilkington?
Pennington. That they run this type of test about 6 times a day. And when they were asked to come over here to talk to these people, they had in their mind that it was just a big joke. And if I understand it correctly, they ran one test on Mr. HICKSON. The machine showed that he was telling the truth. Then they run another one. And then the examiner, he began to wonder himself. So he ran the third test, and he believed just what Mr. Hickson had told him.
Mr. Booth, tell me what happened that night in October.
Well, I got up and had turned off the TV and come to the front door, which you can see right behind me. Just as usual, checking to see if it was locked. So I looked out the window at the top, and naturally I saw this object above the street light out there. So naturally it caught my eye with the lights was on it. Couldn't hear any racket or anything. So I opened the door after a few seconds to step out to see if I could really tell what it was. It just took off.
Can you describe it?
Well, it was round, had lights all the way around it, turning in a counter-clockwise motion. It had a dome on top with a bright light shining out through the top of it. To tell the actual figure of it or anything, you couldn't tell. You could just see the lights and the one on top.
When it happened to Charlie, the creatures, whatever they were, didn't communicate with him. Now, it's enough to say you saw a UFO to give you trouble these days in some towns. To be taken aboard is just a suspect idea. But somehow, if the creatures don't give you a message, you're just a touch less incredible. And Charlie says what he said and what we wrote about in the book. It was like they had a job to do, and they came and they did it.
I think there has to be a reason why that Calvin and me was picked.
Maybe because you could take it.
Well, it might be. I don't know. I think that they know more of what's going on down here on this earth than we think. And I don't know. They might have been, you might say, looking for somebody that could, you might say, hold up under the strain and convince people that there is another world and there's some kind of life on that world.
They were the ones that saw the Pascagoula UFO.
Sorry, mic is muted, but we got to hear from the investigators. They took a lie detector test, and the lie detector test came back. Well, we know that they can be beaten and they're not admissible in court. They passed. So, my question to you is, do you believe it? Is that something that you can get behind with all the evidence that I've showed you here today? And I still have two more pieces of some. One is a clipping from a newspaper of the time. The other is a document from their interrogation. So first, we're going to go into the clipping, and this is what it looked like in October 16th, 1973. Aliens dragged us into a UFO, says terrified fisherman. Right? So this was widely distributed in newspapers and on television and things like that. And from all the stuff that we saw so far, I would have to say that there was definitely something going on out there. And, you know, we know that these things happen in the mountains, right? Or in this area of the country. Like I said, it's a hot spot. And I mean, I have pictures, all types of pictures of what it looked like, and it's a replica of what they saw. We've got a close-up of this picture from everything. It's just a strange occurrence. For this to happen the way that it happened, and for these men to come forward, it took a lot of courage, that's for sure. Because, like I said, who would have wanted to do that? And like I said, you can find more online. This is the document, even though it's hard to see. This is the document from the interrogation. They have made all aspects of this investigation, in this case, open to the public, which is why it was so easy for me to find and so readily available, right? And it's crazy. This is the fact that this was one of the biggest cases in the United States. and that they let you have all of the information that is privy to this specific case shows that these men saw what they saw. And I believe wholeheartedly that they did see what they said they saw. And it's up to you to decide what you think. But with that being said, I'm going to go into this second article. The first that I brought up today was actually the first thing I brought up, which is the fossil footsteps. And this is from 4 hours ago. This came out, and this was on MSNBC or NBC News. So while we don't trust mainstream media, this destroys their narrative that they've perpetrated in history books for so long. For so long. So let's read a little bit about it. So a gentleman by the name of David Bustos heard about ghost tracks. And when he first came to White Sands National Park in New Mexico to work as a wildlife scientist in 2005, when the ground was wet enough for certain times of the year, the ghostly footprints would appear on otherwise blank earth, only to disappear again when it dried out. So specific times of the year draw out or alleviate whatever's on top of this specific place to find these footprints. It wasn't until 10 years later, in 2016, that scientists confirmed the ghost tracks had been made by real people. And it's only now that some of the ancient footprints at White Sand have been dated as the earliest in North America. Now, we know that they love to say, and this is basically trying to go back on some of what we talked about in episode, I believe it was episode 2, where we talked about the history of the Appalachia area, right? Or in these areas, or the United States, and how specific groups of Native Americans got here. And they said that there was this ice bridge in which they crossed. And I gave you something to the contrary of that, because I don't believe that that ice bridge, while it may have had people coming from Asia over to North America, I don't believe that that's where Native Americans came from. And now we're finding out with this article that there is more to the factuality, that the people were here even long before that. So the question I pose to you is, how did they get here? How did they get here? But let's keep going with the footprints really quickly. So this is the gentleman by the name of Bustos again. He says, "We've been suspicious of the age for a while, and now we finally have that. It's really exciting that they have it now. It's really exciting. One of the neat things is that you can see mammoth prints in the layers a meter or so above the human footprints, so that just helps to confirm the whole story. Now, one of the things that this reminds me of is where ancient Sumeria was. They found man handprints, or human handprints, next to Stegosaurus-style footprints. Also, they found cave paintings of man riding on Stegosaurus-like creatures. So, this again brings credence to the fact that these people are now seeing mammoth prints and human footprints together. Again, let's keep going. So, he's basically saying that, the fact that they have these human footprints and these mammoth footprints just helps confirm the whole story, because of the times dated when these animals would have lived together, or humans and this animal. The footprints at White Sand were dated by examining the seeds of an aquatic plant, the Rapura chirahas, commonly known as ditch grass, that once thrived along the shores of the dried up lake. According to the research published Thursday in the journal Science and co-authored by Bustos, the ancient ditch grass seeds were found in layers of hard earth both above and below the human footprints, and at that site of the radiocarbon dated to determine their age. Now, I'm going to show you what these footprints look like, because we're going to share a screen again which is one of the great wonders of technology, is being able to show you what I'm talking about so you can see for yourself what these footprints look like. And as you can see, they look human to me. Where the mammoth prints are, I'm not too sure yet. But this is a great find. This is a great find. And I truly believe that humans were here long before what they say it was. But I digress. It's back to me. So, you know, there are multiple theories of where man came from. We're going to get into it just real quickly. There's the out of Africa theory, or there's the out of Australia theory. A lot of you are familiar with the out of Africa theory. I personally believe that we came from Australia through the work of my friends, Stephen and Evan Strong, and the paleontological digs that they have done to find skulls of ancient ancestors of ours, of a hominid species. Essentially, these footprints also expose that history as we know it, it's not what they say it is. Now, this has to be taken with a grain of salt, because what we do when we do an investigation or we look into things, we never take one source. Now, what I'm going to do on behest of me for doing this research, I'm going to go to this scientific journal and find different studies. Is first off on the type of dating that they did to get this, how it works, radioactive dating, whatever it is. Also, I'm going to try and see if I can find different sources, not of the mainstream media type, because if one of the mainstream outlets is going to talk about it, they all are, right? Mostly. What I'm going to do is I'm going to try and find scientific journal or peer studied journal entries about this specific thing that happened. And, you know, when we figure out that, and this is going to be full circle, you ready? And this is going to be a long stretch, but I'm going to do it. So if we're looking at what we looked at today with the ancient, with the aliens coming and basically abducting people, what's to say that they haven't been doing it since the time of those footsteps, right? Which is why they have big shows such as Ancient Aliens and things like that, where they look at these specific style cave paintings or, these type of fossils and try and determine that mankind has been helped forward with a push from our ancestral aliens that may have come here to help mankind and humanity. Whether you believe that or not is not the debate, right? What we're looking at now is more and more that we study into these historical facts, we find that what we know to be true from textbooks and from the mainstream is not always true. And that leads me to ask, what else are they lying about? Right? My distrust for our scholarly societies of historians and science is tremendous. My mistrust in them is huge because of finds like this. And the fact that when people go to these specific places and start speaking to some of the professional scientists about these types of occurrences, they are going to denigrate it. They're going to brush it off and they're going to tell you no. And there's two reasons for that. First reason is ego. They didn't find it. They're not going to co-sign it. Right? Second, they've been perpetrating this same narrative for so long when it comes to history that to turn back now would mean that everything that we know to be right now would be turned on its head and it would be different. And that is one of the reasons why they will not admit to it, because they don't want to shake the paradigm or the foundations of everything that we know to be our history. And then if they go in and co-sign on one of these things, it won't be our history anymore. But there's people out there like myself, like my friend Omar at Watchers Talk, like my other friend Dark Bear, who's also in the audience. we research these things to get a better understanding of where we came from. Again, a man lost, or a man who doesn't know where he comes from, is a man lost, right? And everybody always says, well, how do we know what we're doing? And it's easy. Research, research, research. You can find this information. It may not be in the people that you may see in a textbook, but there is information out there. There are intellectual scholars out there who are doing their diligence to put this information forward. And they're really trying to shape a different paradigm than what the mainstream perpetrates. Also, one of the things that I personally love about doing this type of research is it's me also working on myself. And, people could say, if you believe in religions, more power to you. I was raised Roman Catholic, and I'm not saying it's right or wrong. Everybody has their interpretation of the spiritual side. So when we figure out what these histories were or mean, whether it's through Catholicism finding these histories or through spirituality, we're able to connect with our history. And our history is important because we know those sayings, history repeats itself. To know the past is to know the future, or to at least know what to expect when you come up on certain situations, like today, and we're not going to go into that because, we don't want to get censored in any way. But it's truly fascinating when the mainstream puts validity when we already know. Well, we don't need the mainstream to validate what we say. But when you start to see them catch on to the things that you've been saying for a long time, it's a great moment. It's a wonderful moment because now not only is your community going to see it, but everybody else is going to see it that may not be in that community, and maybe start doing their own research when they figure out that these things aren't always what they seem, right? And then stories like these two gentlemen who got abducted, that it brings more credence to that. And do we really know what's going on? I mean, they pushed for disclosure for so long, but it's in stories like the ones that we heard today that are the true disclosure. That's the real deal. That's disclosure. Whether you believe it or not is up to you, but this is what it is. So I want to thank you all for stopping by today and all for coming through. We always bring that Thursday night thunder. I am the ultimate outsider, and I love doing these shows. Like I said, in the next few weeks, we're going to get some more guests on, and we're gonna have more of a conversation instead of me just preaching information to you. But I hope everybody got something from this episode. I know I did, and I have a love for this information too. Not only that, I have a love for this history, and it's great to explore, and it's satisfying to me, and I love that. But enough about me. If you guys haven't subscribed to the Full Spectrum Universe YouTube channel, please do, because we are so close to 1,000 subscribers. We're trying to get that number up so we can bring you more exclusive content. We also have a Patreon, which we're going to be loading up with extras. So if you like what you see here, we're going to upload more to the Patreon so you can get more exclusive content. Also, be kind to one another and try and love one another. There's a lot of diversity and a lot of division out there, and a lot of polarity. Let's rise above it, right? We are the ones we've been waiting for. And that's true now. It'll be true tomorrow, and it's been true in the past. So with that being said, thank you to everybody at Appalachian Memes for letting me do a show on there. And thank you to everybody at the Full Spectrum Universe YouTube channel for watching. And this is going to be Rob Yox, and I'm going to be signing off. Everybody have a great evening and do the research. Question everything.